Third part. As expected, company came as the three of them were just finishing a somewhat peculiar breakfast. What made it peculiar was that Dee only ate half as much as young Dan. The menu consisted of ham and eggs on a colossal scale. Mutant chicken eggs a foot across on an inch-thick slab of light, homemade ham, along with preservative-free black bread hot out of the oven, and juice from massive gargantuan grapes, cultivated right on their own farm. Of course, the juice was freshly squeezed, and the 3 large glasses were filled from a single grape. And those were just the main dishes. There was a gigantic bowl of salad and fragrant floral tea, too. Only a farm like the Langs could offer a rich menu like this, and the freshness of the ingredients alone should have been enough to make a good-sized man take seconds or thirds on the ham and eggs. The refreshing morning sunlight and giant lavender blossoms that adorned the table were in essence part of a sacred ritual to give all those gathered around it the strength to fight the cruel frontier for another day. And yet, Dee quickly set down his fork and knife and withdrew to the room in the back Doris had just given him.
That's weird. I wonder if he ain't feeling too good.
Yes, I'm sure it's something like that. And though she pretended nothing was wrong, Doris pictured Dee back in his room now taking his own kind of breakfast, and started to feel ill.
Not you too, sis. What's the matter? I know you like him and all, but don't get sick just because he does.
Doris was about to lay into Dan for his teasing remarks when tension suddenly flooded her face. Outside, a thunder of hoofbeats drew closer. Lots of hoofbeats.
Damn it, here they come,
Dan shouted, dashing over to where a laser rifle hung on the wall. He started to call out for Dee, but Doris's quick hand silenced him.
But why not? It's gotta be Greco and his thugs,
he said with disgust. Let's see if the 2 of us can't handle it first. If that doesn't work, maybe then. But she was perfectly aware that no matter what was going to happen to the 2 of them, Dee wouldn't do anything. Armed with a whip and a rifle, the pair stepped out onto the porch. She let her little 8-year-old brother join her because the law of the frontier was that if you and your family didn't defend your own lives and property, no one else would. If you always relied on others, you wouldn't last long against the fire dragons and golems. In no time, a dozen men on horseback formed up in front of them.
Dear me, the cream of local society is out in force. A no-account little farm like this don't deserve such distinguished guests.
As Doris greeted them in a calm tone, her eyes were cautiously trained on the men in the 2nd and 3rd ranks. In the foremost rank were prominent villagers like Sheriff Luke Dalton, Dr. Sam Faringo, and Mayor Roman. This last was Greco's father, whose face was unusually oily for a man nearing 60. There was no reason to worry about any of those 3 suddenly trying anything funny. But behind them was a mob of brutal hooligans, just itching to make a statement with the magnum guns and battered heat rays they wore on their hips should the opportunity arise. They were all hired hands from Mayor Roman's ranch. Doris glared at each of them in turn with a trace of fear until she came across a familiar face at the very tail of the mob, and her gaze became one of pure contempt. When it looked like trouble was brewing, it was just like Greco to shut his big mouth, find the safest possible place, and try to look like he didn't have the faintest idea what was going on.
So, what's your business?
Apparently by mutual consent, Mayor Roman spoke first.
As if you don't know. We're out here on account of the marks you've got under that scarf. You show them to Doc Faringo now. And if they're nothing, then fine. But if they're... well then, unfortunately we'll have to put you in the asylum.
Doris snorted in derision.
So you believe the nonsense that damn fool son of yours has been talking? He's been out here 5 times asking me to marry him, and I've turned him down every time. So he's stuck with some pretty damn sour grapes. And that's why he's spreading these stories when they ain't true. You keep spreading that filth and you won't like what happens, mayor or not.
The bluff rolled from her so fluently the mayor couldn't get a word in edgewise. His bovine countenance flushed with rage.
That's right. My sister ain't been bit by no vampire. So hit the road, you old pervert.
Dan shouted from his sister's side, pushing the mayor over the edge. What do you mean by calling me an old pervert? Why, you little bastard. To say something like that about the mayor, even in jest. A pervert of all things, I'll have you know. The old man had lost all control. He might hold all the real power in town, but he was still just the mayor of one tiny village. Simply touch on one of his sore spots, and his emotional restraints would burst. In that, he wasn't so different from the thugs behind him. From the back, Greco bellowed, "They're making fools of us. Come on, boys, don't pay them no never mind. Let's grab them and burn the damn house down." Cries of "Hell yeah!" and "Damn straight!" resounded from the rowdies. Hold everything. You pull any of that crap and you'll answer to me. The rebukes flew from Sheriff Dalton. For a moment, Doris's expression was placid. Though still under 30, the sincere and capable sheriff was someone she was willing to trust. The hoodlum stopped moving, too.
Are you with them, Sheriff?
Doris asked in a low voice.
I need you to understand something, Doris. I've got a job to uphold as sheriff in this here village, and checking out your neck is part of it. I don't want things getting out of hand. If it's nothing, then one peek will do. Take your scarf off and let Doc have a look.
He's right, Dr. Faringo said, rising in his saddle. He was about the same age as the mayor, but thanks to his studies of medicine in the capital, he had the intelligent look of a distinguished old gentleman. Because Doris and Dan's father had been a student of his at the education center, this good-natured man worried about their welfare on a daily basis. Before him alone, Doris couldn't hold her head up. No matter what the result may be, we won't do wrong by you. You leave it to me and the sheriff. No way, she goes to the asylum. And Greco's spiteful words came from the back. In this village, we got a rule that anyone that gets bit by a noble goes to the asylum, no matter who they are. And when we can't get rid of the noble, well, then we chuck them out as monster bait. The sheriff whipped around and roared, "Shut up, you damn fool." Greco was shocked into an embarrassed silence, but he drew power from the fact that he was surrounded by his hired hands. Well, put a badge on you and you get pretty damn tough. Before you give me any more back talk, check out the girl's neck. After all, that's what we're paying you for, isn't it? What did you say, boy? The sheriff's eyes had a look that could kill. At that same moment, the hoods were going for their backs and waists with their gun hands.
An ugly situation was developing. "Stop it," the mayor barked bitterly at the entire company. "What do we prove by fighting among ourselves? All we have to do is take a look at the girl's neck and we'll be done here." The sheriff and the hoods had no choice but to begrudgingly go along with that. "Doris," the sheriff called out to her in a gruffer tone than before, "you'd best take that scarf off." Doris tightened her grip on the whip. "And if I say I don't wanna?" The sheriff fell silent. "Get her!" With Greco's cry, the mounted thugs raced right and left. Doris's whip uncoiled for action. "Stop!" the sheriff shouted, but it looked like his commands would no longer do the trick. And just when the battle was about to be joined, the toughs all stopped moving at once. Or to be more accurate, their mounts had jerked to a halt. "What's gotten into you? Move it!" Even a kick from spurred heels couldn't make the horses budge. If the men could have looked into their horses' eyes, they might have glimpsed a trace of ineffable horror. A trace of overwhelming terror that wouldn't permit the horses to be coerced any further, or even to flee. And then the eyes of every man focused on the gorgeous youth in black who stood blocking the front door, though no one had any idea when he'd appeared. Even the sunlight seemed to grow sluggish. Suddenly, a gust of wind brushed across the fields and the men turned away, exchanging uneasy looks. "Who the hell are you?" The mayor tried his level best to sound intimidating, but there was no hiding the quiver in his voice. The youth had about him an air that churned the calm waters of the human soul. Doris turned around and was amazed, while Dan's face shined with delight. Without a word, Dee stopped Doris from saying whatever she was about to say and stepped in front of the Langs as if to shield them. His right hand held a long sword. "I'm Dee. I've hired on with these people." He looked not at the mayor, but at the sheriff as he spoke. The sheriff gave a little nod. He could tell at a glance what the youth before them really was. "I'm Sheriff Dalton. This here's Mayor Roman and Dr. Fringo. And the rest back there don't count for much." After that reasonable introduction, he added, "You're a hunter, aren't you? I see it in your eyes, and the way you carry yourself. I seem to recall hearing there was a man of unbelievable skill traveling across the frontier, and that his name was Dee. And they say his sword is faster than a laser beam, or some such thing. And those words could be taken as fearful or praising." But Dee was silent. The sheriff continued in a hard voice, "Only, they say that man's a hunter, and he specializes in vampires, and that he's a dhampir himself." There were gasps. The village notables and hoods all froze, as did Dan. "Oh, Doris, then you really have been." Dr. Fringo barely squeezed the hopeless words from his throat. "Yes, the girl's been bitten by a vampire, and I've been hired to destroy him. At any rate, the mere fact that she's been bitten by a vampire is reason enough not to let her remain at large. She goes to the asylum," the mayor declared. "Nothing doing," Doris shot back flatly. "I'm not going anywhere and leaving Dan and the farm unattended. If you're hell-bent on doing it, you'll have to take me away by force." "Okay, then," Greco groaned. The girl's manner and speech, defiant to the bitter end,
reawakened his rancor at being spurned. He gave a toss of the chin to his thugs, whose eyes burned with the same shadowy fire as a serpent's. The rowdies were about to dismount in unison, but at that moment their horses reared up simultaneously. There was nothing they could do. Each gave their own cry of oof or ow, and every last one of them was thrown to the ground. The sunny air was filled with moans of pain and the whinnying of horses. D returned his gaze to the sheriff. Whether or not the sheriff comprehended that a single glare from the hunter had put the horses on end was unclear. An indescribable tension and fear flowed between the two of them. "I have a proposal." At these words, the sheriff nodded his assent like he was sleepwalking. "Hold off on doing anything about the girl until I've finished my work. If we come out of it okay, that's fine. If we don't, you can rest assured I'll take care of myself. If he's beaten by the Lord, I'll drive a stake through my own heart." Doris gave a satisfied nod. "Don't let her fool you. This jerk's in league with the nobility. You shouldn't be making deals with him. He's out to turn every last person in Resilva to a vampire, I'm sure of it." Having been thrown to the ground for the second time that day, Greco was still down on all fours, screaming, "Let's do away with the girl. No, better yet, give her to the Lord. That way he won't go after any of the other women." With a foot, a 4-inch wide pillar of flame erupted from the ground right in front of Greco's face. The earth boiled from a blast of more than 20,000 degrees, and the flames leapt to Greco's greasy face, searing his upper lip. He tumbled backwards with a beastly howl of agony. "Say anything else bad about my sister and your head'll be next," Dan threatened, perfectly aligning the barrel of his laser rifle with Greco's face. Though it's true the weapon had no kick, it was still unheard of for a child a good deal shorter than the weapon's length to be skilled enough to hit a target dead on. Far from angry, the sheriff wore a grin that said, "You done good, kid." D addressed the sheriff softly. "As you can see, we have a fierce bodyguard on our side. You could try and plow through us, but a lot of people will probably get hurt unnecessarily. Just wait." "Well, some of them could do with a little hurting, if you ask me," said the sheriff, glancing briefly at the hoodlums moaning behind him. "What do you make of this, Doc?" "Why don't you ask me?" And the mayor screamed, veins bulging. "You think we can trust this drifter? We should send her to the asylum, just like my boy says. Sheriff, bring her in right this moment." "The evaluation of vampire victims falls to me," Dr. Fringo said calmly, and then he produced a cigar from one of his inner pockets and put it in his mouth. It wasn't a cheap one, like the local knockoff artist hand-rolled with 80% garbage. This was a high-class cigar, in a cellophane wrapper, and it bore the stamp of the capital's tobacco monopoly. These were Dr. Fringo's treasure. He gave a little nod to Doris. Her whip shot out with a whoopish. The mayor gave an utterly hysterical cry and grabbed his nose. With one slight twist of Doris's wrist, her whip had taken the cigar from the doctor's mouth and crammed it up one of the mayor's nostrils. Ignoring the mayor, whose entire face was flushed with rage, the doctor declared loudly, "Very well. I find Doris Lang's infection of vampirism to be of the lowest possible degree.
My orders of rest at home for her. Sheriff Dalton and Mayor Roman, do you concur? Yes, sir, the sheriff replied with a nod of satisfaction. But suddenly he looked straight at Dee with the intimidating expression of a man sworn to uphold the law. Under the following conditions, I'll take the word of a damn good hunter and hold off on any further discussion. But let me make one thing crystal clear. I don't want to have to stake you folks through the heart. I don't want to. But if that time should come, I won't give it a second thought. And then, throwing the Lang children a look of pathos, he bid them farewell. I'm looking forward to the day I can enjoy the juice of those gargantuan reed grapes of yours. All right, you dirty dogs, mount up and make it snappy. And I'm warning you, any of you so much as make a peep about this backing down, I'll throw you in the electric pokey. Mark my words. The crowd disappeared over the hill, glancing back now and then with looks of hatred, compassion, and, from some, encouragement. Dee was about to go into the house when Doris asked him to wait. He turned to her coolly, and then she said, "You sure are strange for a hunter. You might have taken on some work you didn't have to, and I can't pay you for it." It's not about work. It's about a promise. A promise? To who? To your little bodyguard over there, he said with a toss of his chin. Then, noticing Dan's stiff expression, he asked, "What's wrong? You hate me because I'm supposedly in league with the nobility?" Nope. As he shook his head, the boy's face suddenly crumpled in on itself and he started to cry. The young hero who'd put Greco in his place minutes earlier now returned to being an 8-year-old boy. He blubbered away as he threw his arms around Dee's waist. This child had rarely cried since the death of his father 3 years earlier. As he watched his sister struggling along as a woman on her own, the boy had secretly nurtured his own stores of pride and determination in his little heart. Naturally, life on the frontier was hard and lonely for him, too. When his youthful heart felt he might be robbed of his only blood relative, he forgot himself and latched on to, not his sister, but rather to the man who had only arrived the day before. Dan. Doris reached for her brother's shoulder with one hand, but Dee gently brushed it away. Before long, the boy's cries started to taper off, and Dee quietly planted one knee on the wooden floor of the front porch, looking the boy square in his tear-streaked face. "Listen to me," he said in a low but distinct voice. Noticing the unmistakable ring of encouragement in his voice, Doris opened her eyes in astonishment. "I promise you and your sister I'll kill the noble. I always keep my word. Now you have to promise me something." "Sure." Dan nodded repeatedly. "From here on out, if you want to scream and cry, that's your prerogative. Do whatever you like. But whatever you do, don't make your sister cry. If you think your crying will set her off too, then hold it in. If you're being selfish and your sister starts to cry, make her smile again. You're a man after all. Okay?" "Sure." The boy's face was radiant. It glowed with an aura of pride. "Okay. Then do your big brother a favor and feed his horse. I'll be heading out on business soon." The boy raced off, and Dee went into the house without another word. "Dee, Doris sounded like something was weighing greatly on her. The vampire hunter ignored her words and said simply, "Come inside. Before I head out, I want to put a little protective charm on you." And then he vanished down the dark and desolate hall. Chapter 2. End.